Hi, my name is Emily, and I'm an alter in Collective Mind, and I'm gonna do the overdue second episode of Small Talk, and I'm gonna talk about system-related terms. We plan to make a different video at some point about different types of alters, like alter roles and littles and middles and fictives and all of those things. So this is going to be just other kind of basic and common terms that'll be helpful to know if you're a system or you know a system. And these are words that we use a lot in our videos. So the first word is system. I'll explain what a system is generally. And a system is just all of the different people sharing one body, sharing one brain. So systems are people who have more than one person in their brain, is the simplest way I can explain it. And in our case, we have DID, dissociative identity disorder, and that's why we have a system, because having a system is part of the diagnostic criteria for DID. And we made a video about the diagnostic criteria if you're interested, and we talked more generally about what DID is in the first episode of Small Talk. And some of this is, I think some of these terms we also explained a little bit in that video, so some of it might be duplicates. The next term is singlet, and that's just if there's only one person in your brain, which is the most common. That's the typical experience, is to be the only person in your brain. And the term that a lot of the system community or plural community, people use the word plural too, and we're okay with both, but we usually use system. But anyway, singlet is the word that the community uses for the most part to describe people who aren't systems, basically. And alter is the word for all of the different people who are in the system. And there are a lot of other words that people will use for it too. Some people still use the word personality, but we think that's confusing because alters are more complicated than just a different personality. But people also use things like headmate and stuff like that. But we mostly use alter, and that's short for alternate state of identity, that's the term that's used clinically when talking about DID and stuff. Okay. And then front, or fronter or fronting or things like that, that's just describing the alter who is controlling what the body does. So I am currently the alter fronting. I'm in the front for our system. So I'm the one talking, I'm the one moving around. And it's kind of like the alter that's in the driver's seat. They're making decisions and all of that stuff. But there can also be more than one alter fronting at a time. We call that co-fronting. That's almost kind of there's more than one person with their hands on the wheel and they're both trying to move it around. And sometimes it goes really well if they're good at working together, and sometimes it's chaos. But then there's also co-conscious, which we shorten a lot of the time to just say co-con or even just co. Or sometimes we'll also say that someone is close. And all of those things are just saying that someone inside is like watching from inside but not really controlling anything. So they're not in the front, but they're close to the front. It's like they're in the passenger seat and they're just also watching through the window, and they can see what we're doing and stuff. And then switching is when the alter who's in the front changes. So like if Aura, who is my mom in our system, if she were to start fronting right now, that would be a switch. That would be her switching with me. Okay. And then inner world, we have a whole video on inner worlds if you want to watch it. But not every system has an inner world, but if they do, it's where alters will go, at least usually when they're not fronting. And I won't get into it too much because we have a whole video about it, but inner worlds can be completely different depending on the system, and they can be pretty much anything. Okay. And then splitting is, so we kind of use it two ways. We use it mostly when we're saying one alter becomes two or more alters, which for us happens when that alter is like really, really stressed, or something really bad happened and they couldn't handle it, and so they split into two or more alters who can hopefully handle it like together. And it can help with like separating memories, so that like, let's say there's one alter who has had a lot of bad things happen to them, and then another new bad thing happens to them and it's too much, and they split into two new alters. Those alters, like one of them might remember one type of bad memories and the other one remembers a different type of bad memories, and it's easier for each of them to not know about all of the memories anymore. That kind of thing. But we also know that sometimes like the system as a whole will just kind of split a new alter, and that, I don't think that happens as much for us, at least not anymore, but I'm not sure, and I don't understand that one as much. But it's just kind of like forming a new alter, but it's kind of like the brain as a whole splitting, but I don't know. If you know more about how that works, feel free to tell us in comments. Okay, and then another thing that can happen if an alter is really overwhelmed and stuff is they can go dormant, which is exactly what it sounds like. It's like they go to sleep for a long time, or like they're in a coma or something like that. It's like they're inactive for a while, and it's like they're taking a really long break. And it might be a little bit different for different systems, but for us, we don't remember the time that we were dormant, but we like feel rested and stuff when we wake up from dormancy. So it's like our brain forces us to take a break, kind of. And in our system, a lot of alters go dormant if they have been trying to do more than they can handle. Okay. And then integration is kind of a really broad term that covers a lot of different types of things, but it's kind of any kind of like lowering barriers is how we understand it from our research and talking to our therapist and stuff, is that integration can be lowering amnesia or better communication, things like that generally, but it can also include things like fusion, which fusion is a type of integration, and it's when two or more alters kind of merge into one alter. we didn't learn about the word fusion for a while when we were first learning about system terms and stuff like that. And we heard a lot of people using the word integration for that. And the way we understand it now is that using integration for that isn't wrong, but it's less specific, so it could be confusing. Because integration is like the blanket term that means a lot of different stuff, including fusion. So people might think you just mean that like those two alters can talk more easily now and share some memories now, and what you actually mean is that they became a whole new different alter from fusing. So that's like integration and fusion. Oh, the other thing I wanted to say is that can sometimes be a result of like doing better, like working through things, working through trauma and that kind of stuff. Or it could be like another example of something that could happen when alters aren't doing very well. So like is kind of the opposite solution that the brain might do. Like instead of splitting, the brain might be like, well, maybe these two alters would cope better if they were smushed together into one instead of split apart into 4 or whatever. So yeah, it can be kind of either way, but it could just be a result of like those alters might have been integrating slowly for a while over time and then end up fusing because they work so closely together now that like there's not much point, like it's not necessary for them to function separately. Like there's all kinds of reasons. Okay. So then the next one is age sliding, and you'll probably see under my name that I'm an age slider, and that's also kind of what it sounds like. It's when an alter's age changes. So not like they just age over time, not that kind of changing, but that it can change like suddenly and like go back and forth. So like I'm normally 11, and I had normally been more like 10 for a while, but I got a little bit older recently. But sometimes I get a lot younger than that, and then I'll get older again, and that's age sliding. And we usually use age sliding to talk about getting younger, and then we'll say like aging up or that kind of thing to talk about getting older. But there's also sometimes it's not sliding into like being a little kid. Sometimes it's just sliding around between a few ages that are close together. Like my mom, Aura, her age is usually between like 19 and 21, and she doesn't feel like super tied to one age in that range, but she'll also slide a lot younger than that. And age can be weird in systems. Okay, so now the next one is dissociation. And dissociation is like a disconnect, is kind of how I think about it. Like it usually involves like a disconnect from time, and like your awareness is less or like wrong in some way. A lot of times our vision gets blurry when we're dissociating. Things seem like fuzzy and weird, and it's like zoning out. Like I think that might be considered a mild type of dissociation, but like clinically significant dissociation would be more than that. Like it would sometimes be more intense than that, but also like more frequent, and it would have to like get in the way of your life in some way. But like a lot of people, or maybe everybody, dissociates at least a little bit sometimes. Like if you're a person who drives and you're driving home from work or something, and it's a drive that you take all the time and you're really used to it, you might kind of zone out and just be like daydreaming or whatever, and then suddenly realize you're home and you don't remember driving there. And like that would be an example of like kind of normal dissociating, unless that's happening to you like all the time and sometimes you don't end up where you were actually trying to go or something like that. And like I'm not a professional, obviously, but like for us, we dissociate like a small to medium amount pretty often, and we'll just kind of like stare into space and not process anything for a little bit, or have a really hard time focusing on what we're doing, and it's like our brain is trying to be somewhere else. But also a lot of stuff about DID happens through dissociation. So like the amnesia that comes with DID is dissociative amnesia. So like everything about our system's life that I don't remember is because I dissociated from it. And like splitting is from dissociation, so like that's a more clinically extreme type of dissociation. So is switching technically. But like when we say that we're dissociating, we're usually talking about like that disconnect in the moment of having trouble focusing, because we have more specific words to use for all of those other things. And then there's two really common types of dissociation that are derealization and depersonalization, and we have both of those a lot. And derealization is when things don't feel real. A lot of times it'll like feel like a dream, it'll look weird. Like when it looks blurry and fuzzy and stuff, for us, that's derealization. And then depersonalization is when it doesn't feel like you. Like if you get surprised when you see yourself in the mirror because it doesn't look like you. Like I think it might be depersonalization if you're like not feeling things that are physically happening to your body. Like if I were poking myself and not feeling it, assuming it's not like because my hand is numb or something, that could be depersonalizing, I think. We sometimes have a hard time distinguishing them, especially in the moment, because it like both of those things sometimes make it harder to think and process things. So we usually just use dissociation as like an umbrella term to cover both, unless we know that it's one of those other things, or unless we're specifically describing one of those other things. But yeah, those are two types of dissociation. Okay, and then there's like triggers, or something being triggering. There's like the way that that's used in a trauma context generally is like something triggers a memory, which isn't necessarily a full memory. It could even just be like the emotional piece of a memory. So like you suddenly get really scared or whatever. And it's anything that like triggers trauma memories. And it doesn't have to be the type of trauma that most people would like think of right away as obviously traumatic. A lot of things can be traumatic. It just depends on your situation and the way your brain handled it, and whether or not you were able to deal with it or process it. Because a lot of times it'll become traumatic because you couldn't talk to anybody about it or process it, or you didn't feel like you could. So like that's a type of trigger, but there's also kind of a more system specific use for it, which isn't necessarily negative, because there can be positive triggers in the system context, and that's just something that triggers a specific alter to switch. Or like we use it sometimes too if it just brings a specific alter really close, even if they don't switch all the way. So like there are a lot of things that can be positive triggers like that, but triggering someone in any way, even with the positive trigger, without their consent isn't nice, because is taking away their choice, and it can be stressful even if it's positive, and it's like disruptive and stuff. So like if you have someone in your life who's a system and you know some positive triggers for some of the alters in their system, ask them if it's okay first before you use them. And it might be okay sometimes, but not other times. Okay. So the next one is subsystem. And subsystems are like separate groups of alters within a system. And there are a few different like common ways that happens. One is like there's kind of a little community of alters within the whole system. So like maybe your inner world has 2 separate towns, and each of those towns is a subsystem. Or maybe you have a really big inner world and there's different planets and each of them are subsystems. A lot of times, like if your system has amnesia, there will a lot of times be higher amnesia and lower communication between like alters in a subsystem and alters outside of that subsystem. That's definitely true in our case. So there's less amnesia like within the subsystem and more amnesia like between different subsystems. But the other main type of subsystem is like an alter who has their own system, and like that alter can switch in the inner world, and it's like the alter has the ID or whatever too. And it's like, so like both of those are like a system within a system in a way, but it's just like in different ways. Okay. And then a type of system is a polyfragmented system, and like we're a polyfragmented system because we have over 200 alters and we have subsystems. And polyfragmented generally, as far as we can tell, just kind of means a big system like with a lot of alters and stuff. But we've heard a lot of people say that it's if you have at least 100 alters and or at least one subsystem, and we meet both of those criteria. So we're a polyfragmented system. And we've also heard that polyfragmented systems like have a less stable alter count in a way. Like they might split more easily and fuse more easily and stuff, and splitting more easily might be part of why they have so many alters. But we also made a whole video on polyfragmented systems, so if you want to know more about that, you can watch that video that we made. And the last one was a term that we learned a lot more recently, which is empty system, which is something we hadn't really thought about, but once it was explained to us, it made a lot of sense. Where like if you're a system and then all of the alters fuse into one, or everybody except one goes dormant or is really far away and like you can't contact them or something, like if you're kind of down to one active alter for whatever reason, but you're not comfortable using the word singlet because like you could split again, or alters could wake up, or you might find out that somebody was there but they were just really far away inside or something, or you're just not comfortable with the word singlet and you still like identify more with being a system even though you don't have more than one alter right now, then you might call yourself an empty system. So yeah, this was supposed to be mostly like common terms that you'll hear a lot on this channel, or if you're like hanging out in system spaces and things like that. And it's terms that are like helpful to know generally, but we're going to talk about types of alters separately in a different video. But if you think of more terms that you want us to talk about, we can make a part 2. Just feel free to give us ideas in comments or on our Discord server, which the link to the Discord server is in the description. There's some recommended videos on the screen, and thank you so much for watching. Bye!